city of New York was actually experiencing a massive nervous breakdown.
There was palpable fear in the hearts of people in the streets of the city at night. One man terrorized 16 million people.
This was a mystery. Nobody had even a clue as to who was doing this.
I lost my ability to love, have compassion. I became an animal.
For 13 months, David Berkowitz prowled the streets, looking for young women to kill. He called himself the Son of Sam and stirred up the emotions of hardened New Yorkers with his haunting words and hateful deeds. On Christmas Eve, 1975, David Berkowitz attacked a 14-year-old girl with a knife. As he tried to stab the girl through her winter coat, she screamed and struggled in his arms. Berkowitz cut himself with the knife.
It was so traumatically horrible to him that he vowed that he could never do that again. But then his mind went to work and he tried to figure out a different way to do it.
At his next attempt, and all the ones to follow, Berkowitz would use a far more impersonal weapon.
I became virtually a killing machine, just a machine of destruction.
In the summer of 1953, Pearl and Nathan Berkowitz adopted a 3-day-old boy and brought him home to their small apartment in the Bronx. Little David was a blessing because the couple couldn't have children of their own. One of David's earliest memories was his parents telling him that he was adopted and that his real mother had died giving birth to him.
Every time he and his parents would pass the Bronx County Courthouse where the surrogates court is located, they would point to it, tell him that that's where the judge awarded him to them because they loved him more than anybody in the world.
Nathan Berkowitz worked 6 long days a week running a hardware store. Pearl was a homemaker who loved to show off her little boy. While David's childhood seemed normal enough, including Little League and occasional trips to Yankee Stadium with his father, David sensed early on that there was something wrong, something he could not express.
My parents had such great hopes for me. They tried to raise me as best as I could, you know, and they fed me and clothed me and gave me love, but there was just something in me that would not respond to that love and pushed it away. I was so self-destructive.
When David fought with other boys in the neighborhood, they would taunt him saying, "You're not a real kid, you're adopted."
Maybe it's sort of like a Pinocchio cinch, you know, he was trying to be this real, live, biological boy, and somehow knowing that he was adopted made him feel less than genuine from day one.
Worse than the shame he felt over being adopted was his guilt, knowing that his biological mother had died in childbirth.
He would lie awake at night, fearing that his father was going to come and murder him in his bed because he had killed his biological mother.
David's dark imagination was fueled by the many horror films he watched on television. He suffered from terrible nightmares, but was often too frightened even to speak about them.
He would actually get in his closet, cover up with clothes and blankets that may have been in there, and stay there for hours, his family not even knowing where he was, tormented by these nightmares.
Berkowitz hated school and would run home as fast as he could to be with his mother, whom he adored. She was only too happy to dote on her only child. David, in turn, secretly poisoned his mother's parakeet to eliminate what he regarded as a rival for her affections. She never suspected her little angel. Despite David's adoration for his mother, he could also be cruel to her.
We were talking about his aggression during childhood, and he described it this way: I was very vicious, and mean towards her, meaning his adoptive mother, and used to throw things at her and hurl insults at her.
When David was 10, his mother took him to see a child psychologist, but it didn't help. David was a secretive child, and no one was allowed into his world.
When he was a preteen, 10, 11, 12 years old, he would tell about climbing out the window at night down the fire escape and roamed the streets of New York City, he said, like an alley cat.
The dark city alleys were a stark contrast to the light that David's mother brought into their home. Following Jewish tradition, she lit the Sabbath candles every Friday night. At the age of 13 in 1966, David had his bar mitzvah and read from the Bible in Hebrew. But the burden of his Jewish heritage only exacerbated his deep-rooted feelings of shame. "I'm not a proud Jew," he later wrote. "Jews are supposed to be honest, law-abiding, and respectful of parents. I am none of these. I am a disgrace." One night, shortly after his bar mitzvah, in a fit of adolescent rage, David said something cruel to his mother that he would have to live with for the rest of his life.
She was on her way out to go to dinner, and he screamed at her, I hate you, I hope you die." And essentially, that was the last time he saw her alive. Unbeknownst to anyone, she was in the advanced stages of breast cancer and collapsed at dinner that evening.
The only person he really felt close to in the whole world wasted away in the cancer ward and then died. David cried for days.
I was a lot closer to my mom than I was to my dad. My dad, he had to work all the time, 6 days a week. It wasn't his fault. And then I had trouble, lots of trouble all through my youth, emotional problems and things, mental problems. And when she died, of course, then I lost everything.
David's loneliness intensified. He was extremely shy and blushed easily, especially around girls. He would ride his bike for hours, often to his mother's grave. He lingered in the cemetery, fascinated by the tombstones of people who died young. He wondered if the girls had been pretty.
My dad used to cry and plead with me to come and talk with him. And he says, I don't even know you. You're my son. You're like a stranger. That's just the way I was. I don't know why. It was just these blocks that were up where I just didn't want to share nothing that was on my mind, nothing that was on my heart. I was a closed book, and that was that.
Because of his chronic truancy, David barely graduated from high school. In 1971, the 18-year-old Berkowitz enlisted in the Army. He was full of patriotic fervor and fantasized about dying a heroic death in Vietnam. Instead, he was shipped to Korea and qualified as a sharpshooter with an M16 rifle. He tried to find a girlfriend among the Korean prostitutes who hung around the base, but he found the effort degrading. David wrote to his father, apologizing for being a burden and amounting to nothing in society. He wrote that he was sorry he turned out the way he did, stupid, hateful, ugly, destructive. Berkowitz begged his father to pretend he never had a son, to forget that he even existed. In 1973, as Berkowitz turned 20, the Army transferred him to Fort Knox, Kentucky. Out of his longing for companionship, he became involved with a Baptist church. He attended classes, read dozens of books, and soon was baptized.
He was particularly impressed about how families were together on Sundays and when they prayed together. And he wanted this to be part of this group very, very much.
All the preaching about evil, sin, and eternal damnation, however, constantly reminded Berkowitz of the bleak future that awaited him in hell. His religious fervor quickly extinguished. Berkowitz was also discovering that the Army was no place for him. After a series of disciplinary problems, he was discharged in 1974 and returned to New York. Eager for a fresh start, he enrolled at Bronx Community College. His father, too, had made a fresh start. Nathan remarried and decided to move to Florida and retire. Berkowitz resented his new stepmother and her daughter for invading his home and taking away his father. The 21-year-old began to feel that there was a mysterious force around him that repelled people. He referred to himself as de Schmutz, Yiddish for dirty one. His world was rapidly shrinking. Berkowitz moved into his own apartment and got a job as a warehouse security guard on the docks of the west side of Manhattan. From the depths of his loneliness, he began to think about the birth mother he never knew, the one whose death weighed on his conscience. Berkowitz would soon unravel the mystery of who he really was. What he found would propel him onto the street in search of blood. David Berkowitz began a desperate quest at the age of 21 to find out exactly whose son he really was. But instead of saving him from his misery, his journey to discover his birth parents would launch Berkowitz on a year-long killing spree.
He had gone to one of these Freedom of Adoption Movement meetings and told them the story of how his mother had died giving birth to him, and he had a father out there somewhere, and people laughing at him and said, what are you laughing about? This is a tragedy. My mother died. I said, man, that's what they tell all of us.
Berkowitz called his adoptive father, Nathan, and demanded the truth. Nathan broke the news that David's birth mother was in fact alive. He explained that the adoption experts had advised against revealing the truth. Berkowitz was stunned. In an instant, he was delivered from a lifetime of guilt. He had not caused his mother's death after all. Berkowitz's adoption papers said that his real name was Richard David Falco, and that his parents were Betty and Tony Falco. He searched for them for months, but he kept hitting dead ends. Frustrated and lonely, Berkowitz, who had tried during his army years to find comfort in religion, now joined a cult of Satan worshippers. Berkowitz enjoyed the late-night rituals in the woods, the chanting, the drugs, and the opportunity to meet girls. He connected easily to the dark forces that the group worshipped. He even made a blood pact to serve the devil.
I was chanting the names of Lucifer over and over, and I was calling out to him. I said, son of the morning, and prince, my Lord, come into me right now, take control of this vessel. And I felt like I was being emptied of my own personality, and that something else somehow was coming in.
The group gave Berkowitz a sense of belonging to a family, and he eagerly accepted their mission. His other mission, to track down his biological parents, was finally accomplished after a year of searching. When he first spoke on the phone with his birth mother, Betty Falco, David's expectations soared.
At last, he had found his normalness, his biology, the reason for his existence. And what he thought would be this glorious moment when he would find his real live mom and they would fall lovingly into each other's arms, turned into one of the moments, if not the moment, of his greatest disappointment.
Berkowitz had fantasized about meeting a beautiful woman. What he found was a totally ordinary person, what he described as a nervous and frightened little woman. Betty apologized profusely for abandoning her little Richie.
I remember him mimicking her and saying, "Oh, Richie, I'm sorry, in this sort of high, whiny voice, and putting his hands over his ears as he did that to try to shut out the sound that he recalled her making.
Berkowitz hid his disappointment and told Betty that he loved her and forgave her because he knew she must have had a good reason for giving him up. Betty revealed to David that Tony Falco wasn't his real father. Betty Falco had secrets too. Betty, a daughter of poor Jewish immigrants, had married Tony as a teenager. After they had a daughter named Rosalind, Tony left Betty for another woman. Betty had then begun a long affair with Joseph Kleinman, a well-to-do Jewish businessman who was married with 3 children. In 1953, David was born. Kleinman would not tolerate the embarrassment of an illegitimate child. Betty too felt guilty and ashamed and quickly made arrangements for an adoption.
He learns at the moment of his imagined rebirth that he had intruded upon the lives of these two people who were simply together having sex.
Berkowitz's relief